Or maybe he means well, but maybe he's a little off. Maybe he's making some claims that aren't real. Because what I'm going to talk about is, in fact, if you really get it, if you really understand it, we will look back in time 50 years from now and say that was the turning point in the way we thought about mental illness. And that was the turning point that changed the trajectory of lives for people who are now warehoused in prisons, for people who are homeless on the streets, for people who take their lives. And so I'm going to talk with you about the brain energy theory of mental illness. I have no financial disclosures other than royalties from a book that I just published. The book is available at most libraries, so go get it for free if you want to get it for free. I'm actually being asked by a lot of companies, biotech companies, supplement companies, and others, to sit on their advisory boards, and they'll give me money. And they'll give me money to promote their products. And I'm turning all of them down, right and left. Because this work matters. This work has the potential to change people's lives, to save people's lives. And I don't want anybody ever accusing me of doing this work so that I can make money. So here's a quick snapshot of where we're at in the world today. Prior to the pandemic, mental and substance use disorders affected about 1 billion people on the planet. Just in the year 2017 alone. Rates are even higher now because the pandemic took a toll. Mental disorders are now one of the leading causes of disease burden and disability throughout the world. Access to care is a big problem. Stigma is a big problem. And for some people, that is the barrier. But there are countless people, millions of people taking their pills, doing their psychotherapy, and not getting better. Our current treatments fail to work for far too many people. And the rates of mental illness have been rising for decades across a broad range of diagnostic categories. Autism. Rates have quadrupled in the last 20 years. Bipolar disorder. Rates have doubled in the last 20 years. ADHD, depends on what study you look at. Anywhere from 30% to maybe upwards of 80-90% increase rates. As some of you may know, we have an Adderall shortage right now because there's just an epidemic of ADHD. And depression, plain old bread and butter major depression. What's happening with that? Gallup poll, just out about 2 months ago. All-time ever recorded highs for both current prevalence of major depression and lifetime prevalence of major depression. It begs the question, what on earth is going on? And the only way we can even begin to answer the question, what on earth is going on, is to be able to answer this simple question. What exactly causes mental illness? And right now, although some of you will have heard it's neurotransmitter imbalances, and others will have heard it's trauma. Trauma in childhood causes mental illness. And it's really all that simple. If you talk to the leading neuroscientists and psychiatrists, the good ones will tell you nobody knows. It's too complicated. Yeah, trauma's involved, yeah, neurotransmitters involved, but neither one of those is sufficient or necessary to explain mental illness. So instead of knowing exact causes, all we know are risk factors, and we put them into this model called the biopsychosocial model, which says that there are biological factors like neurotransmitters, genetics, and hormones, psychological and social factors like trauma, poverty, crime, loneliness, These things all come together to cause mental illness, but how do they fit together? Too complicated, no one knows. And what I am here to boldly assert is that I think we now have enough evidence, not discovered by me. I have simply reviewed decades and decades of research, and I believe we have more than enough to finally put this puzzle together. And what I am arguing is that mental disorders are, in fact, metabolic disorders of the brain. And what I'm saying is that all of those biopsychosocial risk factors can be understood through their impact on metabolism, that metabolic dysfunction in cells can actually explain why the brain would malfunction in a way that we call mental illness. This is a way to integrate all of those risk factors, and it is a way to once and for all integrate mental and physical illness. Before I get started with explaining this theory and giving you just a tiny, tiny glimpse of the evidence to support it, I want to quote Albert Einstein, who also came up with a new theory. And he says, creating a new theory is not like destroying an old barn and erecting a skyscraper in its place. It's rather like climbing a mountain, gaining new and wider views, and discovering unexpected connections between our starting point and the rich environment. But the point from which we started still exists and can be seen, but it forms a smaller part of this big picture. Why do I say this? Because everything that you think you know about mental illness is still true. I'm not here to destroy that. I'm here to integrate it. I'm here to ask the neuroscientists and the psychiatrists and the patients and all of you to try to think of a bigger picture, to try to see the overarching picture so that we can once and for all understand, at least a little bit better, what we call mental illness. Because this actually has very important consequences today. But it also maps out an entirely new way to think about and research and develop new treatments for what we call mental illness. So now I'm going to begin on this little journey of giving you a snapshot of the evidence. And the first line of evidence is correlation. There are strong bidirectional relationships or correlations between what we call mental illness and all of the disorders that you see on the right-hand side of your screen. Obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and Alzheimer's disease. And what do I mean when I say strong bidirectional relationships? What I mean is that if you look at a group of people with mental illness, they're more likely to develop all of the disorders on the right-hand side of the screen. But if you look at a group of people with diabetes or Alzheimer's, they're more likely to have symptoms of what we call mental illness. So let me give you just a tiny snapshot of some of these statistics. People with mental illness, chronic mental disorders, are 2 to 3 times more likely to develop obesity and diabetes. They're more likely to develop heart attacks and strokes. People with chronic depression, 2 to 3 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease. But get this, if you have schizophrenia and you live to the young age of 66, you are 20 times more likely to also get diagnosed with dementia on top of your schizophrenia. So what about the other way around? Obesity, a huge population study that just came out a month ago. People with obesity, 50% to 300% more likely to have a wide range of mental disorders. People with diabetes, 2 to 3 times more likely to develop depression, which is the best study, but when they get depressed, it lasts 4 times longer. So that at any time, at least about 50% of people with diabetes will have at least some symptoms of major depression. About a quarter of them will meet full criteria for major depression, even though they're taking antidepressants. Cardiovascular disease, 3 to 5 times the rates of major depression as in the general population. Alzheimer's disease. Essentially 100% of people with Alzheimer's disease will have symptoms of mental illness. They will have depression, anxiety, agitation, insomnia. 40 to 50% will have hallucinations and delusions. Those are the hallmark symptoms of what we call schizophrenia. So I want you to think about that. If you're schizophrenic, you have a 20-fold increased risk of developing Alzheimer's disease by the time you turn 66. And if you've got Alzheimer's disease, there's a 50-50 chance you're going to have symptoms of schizophrenia. We cannot talk about the root cause of mental illness without talking about the root causes of all of the disorders on this slide. And in fact, it goes beyond just the disorders that I listed. This paper just out about a month ago. Major depression. People with major depression have more physical illness across the board. 29 different physical illnesses that require hospitalization. Many of these were thought to be bidirectional relationships. People with mental disorders are dying early deaths. We have long known that people with chronic serious mental illness like chronic depression, bipolar, and schizophrenia lose anywhere from 7 to 30 years of life, depending on what study you look at. But in fact, a large population study published in Lancet says something more dire. Every mental disorder is associated with premature mortality. Anxiety disorders, personality disorders, all of them. On average, men are losing 10 years of life, women are losing 7 years of life. What are these mentally ill people dying of? They must be killing themselves. Yes, suicide rates are higher, but you said it. They are primarily dying of heart attacks and strokes and diabetes and premature Alzheimer's disease. They are dying of metabolic disorders. Why? It's not like this has gone unnoticed. The World Health Organization put together a team of experts and issued a report in 2016. Why? What's going on? And they came up with 3 buckets of explanations. Factors related to the individual's behavior and or his or her disorder. The medications that we're giving them cause weight gain and diabetes. It's the meds. Or it's their behavior. The mentally ill overeat and under-exercise. They're lazy sloths. Or it's problems at the health system level. The mentally ill don't go to their primary care doctors and take their statins like good patients. Or it's wider societal issues. The mentally ill are more likely to be poor and unemployed. And we know from large population studies that poor, unemployed people live shorter lives. Stressful to be poor and unemployed. But at the end of the day, these explanations, I fear, are really about blaming the victims. The mentally ill are lazy slobs. They overeat, they under-exercise, they don't work, and they don't obey their primary care doctors. But in fact, if you start looking at the science, the detailed neuroscience, cell biology science, metabolic science, we actually get a very different picture. This is a longitudinal study following over 5,000 kids from birth to age 24. Children with the highest levels of insulin resistance beginning at age 9 had a 500% increased risk for having a psychosis at risk mental state by the time they turned 24. What does that mean? They were 5 times more likely to be at risk for developing bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. They were 3 times more likely to already be diagnosed with this disorder. Insulin resistance comes first before we give them any pills. No pills, no unemployment, insulin resistance, schizophrenia. Children who gained the most weight around the time of puberty, 4-fold increased risk of developing depression. The reality is these statistics get mixed and matched and skewed, but the reality is that insulin-resistant kids were also twice as likely to develop depression, but that wasn't statistically significant. The children who gained a lot of weight were also more likely to develop diabetes or bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, but that didn't reach statistical significance. And in fact, in many ways, as I've said, this is nothing new. Researchers knew in the 1800s about the connections between what we call obesity and diabetes and mental illness. Basic science research dates to the 1940s. We have a plethora of basic science, neuroimaging, and other types of research. What mental illness are you talking about, Dr. Palmer? I'm talking about all of them. I'm talking about depression, anxiety, PTSD, schizophrenia, bipolar, anorexia, alcoholism. What do I mean when I say metabolic problem? I mean, at the cellular level, differences in lactate, glucose metabolism, the ATP to ADP ratio, reactive oxygen species, redox markers, inflammation. A lot of you have heard of insulin. Insulin is a huge signaling molecule in the human brain and plays a role in how our brains function. And so right here, this is probably the most important slide that I really want you to just pay attention to. Because a lot of people who hear my message are like, so Dr. Palmer, what the hell are you saying? Are you saying that insulin resistance causes all mental illness? Or are you saying that all of the mentally ill people will get fat and diabetic? I'm not saying either of those. Not in absolute terms. It's more complex than that. It's not about absolutes. It's about risk. It's about understanding biology, and that this gets into risks. Smoking increases your risk for lung cancer. Some would say smoking causes lung cancer. All smokers don't get lung cancer. And all lung cancer patients aren't smokers. There's more to lung cancer than smoking. And you can get by with smoking a lot, and you can get lucky and not get lung cancer. But there's a strong association. That's what I'm talking about. And what I am saying is that what we think of as mental and what we think of as metabolic are interconnected in ways that most people don't understand or appreciate. So this top box is what a lot of people would think of as mental. So mental things are those, that's neurotransmitter imbalances, or that's stress, or childhood adverse events, or it's addiction, or trauma. I'm sorry about the graphics on this, they didn't come through very well. And metabolic disorders like obesity and diabetes, that's all about diet and exercise. If everybody just followed the right diet, and we hear all the that's like keto or low carb. If everybody just does keto and low carb and exercises a little bit, they'll all be fine. We'll stamp out all obesity. And what I'm here to say is neither one is quite so simple. We've long known that there's this other category of both. Genetics and epigenetics play a role. Hormones, inflammation, sleep, the gut microbiome, these things also play a role in both mental and metabolic. But what I'm really here to say is that adverse childhood experiences, children who are abused and live horrible, awful lives, are more likely to develop essentially all of the mental disorders. PTSD, yeah. Depression, yeah. Anxiety, yeah. Personality disorders, yeah. Bipolar and schizophrenia, yeah. Addictions, yeah. So they're more likely to develop all the mental disorders, and as I say that, you're probably all like thinking, well, yeah, we all know that. Those same kids are also more likely to develop obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and on average, if you have 6 or more ACEs, compared to people who have no ACEs, you live 20 years less. 6 ACEs takes 20 years off of the average lifespan. What are they dying of? Heart attacks, and obesity, and diabetes, and their mental disorders. So what I am saying is that it's not eating carbs causes all mental illness. It's not, if everybody gave up carbs, we would eradicate all mental illness. What I'm saying is that what we think of traditionally as mental health and what we think of as metabolic health are inseparable, and that we need a more sophisticated way to put them together. So I'm talking about metabolism, metabolic. What exactly is metabolism? A lot of people think about it as burning calories, or they think about it as metabolic syndrome. But I'm here to tell you it is so much more than that. It is the process of taking food, turning it into energy or building blocks. It also is involved in the management of waste products. Metabolism is fundamental to the definition of living organisms. So in this sense, Dr. Palmer, of course, that if you're going to take that kind of global definition of metabolic, then of course mental health has to somehow or another relate to it. And that's what I want. I want everyone to say, well, duh, of course. Because I'm soon going to get you to a gotcha. So what controls metabolism? So saying it's metabolic isn't really all that helpful, actually. Metabolism is too complicated, it's everything in biology. So what? So what, Ms. Palmer? How does that help us? If we ask a common sense question, well, what exactly controls metabolism? What does that mean? We are led to these tiny things in our cells called mitochondria. Now, most of you probably know mitochondria as the powerhouse of the cell. They take food and oxygen and turn it into ATP. They do that, no doubt about it. But over the last 20 years, we have research that completely upends and shatters that simplistic definition of mitochondria. Mitochondria are so much more than that. There are hundreds or thousands of them in our cells, almost all of our cells. They are involved in numerous cellular processes. There is no doubt this is a cutting-edge area of medical research, and there is so much we do not know. I'm the first to say that. This kind of cartoon gives you a sense. If you have some blind researchers studying the elephant, what are they reporting that they feel or see or touch? They're different parts. And it's the same with mitochondria. What are mitochondria? Mitochondria are doing so many things. And I could give you a really nerdy science thing. There are actually multi-day conferences that go over the nerdiness of all of these things, but I'm going to make it simple for you with this slide. Here's just a snapshot of what mitochondria do and what influences mitochondrial function. Mitochondria are directly involved in the production, regulation, and release of some neurotransmitters that all of you probably heard of: dopamine, serotonin, glutamate, GABA. Mitochondria are probably the primary factor that most significantly affects epigenetics, or the expression of genes from the cell nucleus. Mitochondria are involved in turning inflammation both on and off. Mitochondria are involved with the gut microbiome, and the gut microbiome influences mitochondria. Diet and exercise play a role. But believe it or not, mitochondrial function in certain brain cells determines whether mice overeat. Mitochondrial function in those same cells determines whether those same mice get fat or not. But of course, what we eat influences mitochondria, because mitochondria are the food burners. They are where the food is going. But it's not just biology. Adverse childhood events, stress and trauma impact mitochondrial function. And mitochondrial function, some animal research just came out like less than a month ago. Researchers can manipulate mitochondria in certain brain regions and turn mice into dominant mice or passive submissive mice, just based on the mitochondrial function in specific brain cells. Alcohol and drug use play a role, hormones play a role, and if you can get a sense, these are all the things that play a role in mental illness, but these are also all the things that play a role in what we call metabolic illness. Obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. So what causes mental illness? I am here to boldly and audaciously say metabolic and mitochondrial dysfunction or dysregulation. There are 4 key words on this slide. They mean different things, and it gets very nuanced in terms of understanding this, but this is the best soundbite I could come up with and feel like I'm actually staying scientifically somewhat accurate. Much more importantly, so you got a theory, Dr. Palmer. So what? What does it matter? Well, it actually matters a lot for people right now. So there are many treatment options, and I'm going to discuss diet soon. That's kind of my claim to fame. That's where I'm kind of leading a lot of research. I really, really beg you, please focus on this slide. This is the takeaway. Metabolic treatments are complicated. They involve diet, exercise, sleep. Medications can play a role. Stress reduction, substance use, all of these things play a significant role. There are no cure-alls. There's no panacea. But if you put this all together, we can actually get people better. But now I am going to zero in just to give you a flavor of why does this matter? Does it really matter? Is this anything new? And I'm going to talk about the ketogenic diet as a metabolic treatment for what we call mental illness. I'm going to assume you all know what keto is. High-fat, low-carb diet, mimics the fasting state. Some of you may have heard your doctor say that's a dangerous fad diet. I want you to just say back to them in very not angry language. Don't be mad. Don't be defensive. Just correct them. Doctor, the ketogenic diet is an evidence-based treatment for weight loss, type 2 diabetes, and epilepsy. We have dozens and dozens of randomized controlled trials published in the best journals. Didn't you know that? The reason I'm so interested in this is because it is an epilepsy treatment, a 100-year-old epilepsy treatment, and we use epilepsy treatments in the mentally ill every day in tens of millions of people. There are 5-day conferences on what on earth is the ketogenic diet doing in the brain. One of it's changing neurotransmitters, decreasing brain inflammation, doing all sorts of things, but it is improving mitochondrial function and health. And that is where I am focused, and I think that's actually the magic of the ketogenic diet. Could be wrong. There are other researchers who think it's the gut microbiome effect. The ketogenic diet changes the gut microbiome, and that's the benefit. That's fine. Some people can have different opinions. But according to my overarching theory, it's really about mitochondria. So does it actually work? So there's some theory, there's science. We actually have more and more studies published in leading journals now from leading neuroscientists and psychiatrists who are all jumping on this bandwagon. Publishing the science and how why haven't we been using this ketogenic diet for the mentally ill? This makes so much sense. It is an evidence-based treatment for epilepsy. Where have we been? Does it work? Right now, we're in the infancy of this research. We have this randomized controlled trial, keto diet versus a low-fat diet for Alzheimer's disease. When all the patients got both diets separated by a 10-week interim period, when they were on the ketogenic diet, they had improvement in quality of life, activities of daily living. Those were statistically significant differences. They even had improvement in cognition, but that did not reach statistical significance. Alcoholism. What the hell does that have to do with diet? Well, research by none other than Nora Volkow, the director of the National Institute of Drug Abuse, for decades has found glucose hypometabolism in the brains of people with alcoholism. Their brains aren't getting enough energy from glucose. Animal models have already demonstrated the benefit of the ketogenic diet. So they took a group of alcoholics, admitted them to a government facility, and detoxed them. Half got standard American diet, half got keto. The ones who got keto had fewer withdrawal symptoms, required fewer benzodiazepines for their detox, had lower levels of brain inflammation, had improved brain metabolism, and craved less alcohol. Serious mental illness. We now have at least, 5 to 10 studies underway. These are the ones already published. 2 studies are about to be published. Ketogenic diet for serious treatment-resistant mental illness, schizophrenia, bipolar, and chronic depression. Of 28 patients who were able to do the keto diet, 100% had at least some improvement in symptoms, but 43% got a clinical remission. That doesn't happen with the best treatments that we have to offer today. What if you want to implement this diet? This is not keto for weight loss. I want you to think about this as keto for epilepsy. If you saw a little kid seizing, you, if you're a lay person, wouldn't say, I know how to do keto, I'll help this kid control his seizures. You would send that kid to a neurologist and a ketogenic dietitian who are professionals, who are really going to treat this very life-threatening brain disorder. People with schizophrenia and bipolar deserve the same competent care. Unfortunately, right now, we don't have those clinicians. That is one of my passions. We need more clinicians doing this work. But these people do need professional help. There are risks with ketogenic diet in these patients. Keto adaptation is dangerous. Patients with bipolar and schizophrenia and chronic depression, I've seen a lot of them get hypomanic and manic. And if you're not a trained mental health professional and you don't know how to manage safely hypomania and mania, I don't want you taking your son or daughter or sister or husband or wife who has schizophrenia or bipolar and just winging it, because you're probably going to end up in trouble. And I don't say that to discourage the use of the ketogenic diet. I passionately want this offered to everyone. So we have tons of research underway. Harvard, Oxford, Hopkins, Stanford, and others are doing these trials. This is going to change the mental health field, I'm convinced. Thank you.
performance can be challenging. Compromise no more with the